What happens when a brother turns his back on the very family that raised him? When the blood you share becomes a battleground for public humiliation, betrayal, and endless scrutiny. Imagine being Prince William, standing in the ornate halls of Buckingham Palace, holding a statement that his own brother, Prince Harry, had just released to the press, and feeling something he never thought he would, fury mixed with heartbreak. You think you know your family. You think you can forgive, you think you can reason, but sometimes, the words, the actions, the relentless attacks leave no room for anything but a boiling, unstoppable anger. And that is exactly where William finds himself today. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story we are about to tell is not just about royal protocol or palace gossip. It's about betrayal, sibling rivalry, and the kind of personal warfare that unfolds in front of the entire world. You've probably read headlines, glimpsed snippets on social media, or caught sound bites in interviews. But the real story, the one that paints the full picture of what happened behind closed doors, is far more shocking than any tabloid could ever capture. And what William did in response is something that even palace insiders say changes everything. It all started with a series of attacks. Not subtle remarks, not fleeting complaints, but relentless, public attacks by Harry aimed squarely at the royal family. Each statement was designed to provoke, to shame, and to undermine the image of the monarchy. Each one chipped away at the trust William had always held for his younger brother. And while the world watched Harry speak on global platforms, William was watching the slow, painful erosion of family loyalty. And it wasn't just about reputation. It was personal. Every word, every implication, every offhand comment stung. And for someone who had been trained to manage crises, to remain composed, this was something different. This was raw. This was personal. You might ask yourself, why now? Why does it feel like William has reached a breaking point? The answer lies in timing. Over the past several months, Harry has escalated his attacks in ways that the palace simply could not ignore. He appeared in interviews with unprecedented openness, revealing family disputes, critiquing royal protocols, and making claims that left even seasoned aides unsettled. Every statement was dissected, every nuance amplified, and every slight to William or the monarchy was magnified by the media. Imagine getting up every morning to find your brother has not only gone public, but has framed your actions, your decisions, and even your character in a way that makes you appear cold, uncaring, or worse, incompetent. The public, hungry for drama, devours this, and suddenly the narrative of a loyal heir becomes clouded by accusations, insinuations, and orchestrated narratives. And yet, William remained silent for as long as he could. He had a reputation to uphold, a family to protect, and a public image carefully cultivated over decades. He understood the optics, the headlines, the sound bites that would come if he reacted impulsively. But silence, as he soon discovered, is not always golden. Inaction is interpreted as weakness. Forgiveness is interpreted as agreement. And the world began to sense a shift. Harry was gaining the upper hand in the public eye, controlling the narrative, dictating the conversation, and leaving William to wrestle privately with a growing storm. But let's step back for a moment and consider the stakes. We are not talking about a simple family dispute. The royal family is one of the most public institutions in the world. Every gesture, every glance, every comment is scrutinized, analyzed, and turned into a story. Reputation is currency. Public trust is fragile. And in this arena, betrayal has consequences far beyond personal hurt. It ripples outward, affecting advisors, extended family, and even the perception of the monarchy itself. When Harry's words hit the press, it was not just William who felt the sting. The entire palace felt the tremor. And yet, for William, there was an added layer, one that no amount of royal protocol could shield him from. This was about a brother he once loved, a bond he cherished, and the sense that everything he had built in family and public service was being questioned by someone he should trust most. The tension is almost unimaginable. Picture it. William pacing the corridors of a grand, historic palace, thick velvet curtains filtering the afternoon sun, a phone in his hand showing another headline, another interview clip, another damning soundbite from his brother. Advisors hovered discreetly nearby, hesitant to intervene, knowing that the walls of the palace have ears and that the story is already spreading like wildfire. William stops, clenches his jaw, and for a moment, the calm, composed future king vanishes, replaced by a man feeling betrayed, targeted, and cornered. And in that moment, the decision crystallizes. Enough is enough. What happens next is the beginning of the turning point. The moment when William moves from private frustration to public response, from careful contemplation to decisive action. But even before that, the story demands context. To understand the depth of William's anger, we must revisit the history that led to this explosive confrontation. Sibling rivalry is one thing. A public feud is another. But what we are witnessing now is decades in the making. A culmination of childhood dynamics, parental influence, shared tragedies, and the pressures of growing up in the most scrutinized family in the world. Every smile captured in photographs, every handshake, every subtle glance in official engagements. Each played a role in shaping the relationship between William and Harry. And yet, for all that history, nothing could have prepared the public, or even the palace, for the intensity of William's response. And that's what makes this story so urgent. Because unlike previous royal disputes, this isn't just speculation or rumor. We are seeing calculated actions, deliberate attacks, and emotional consequences that are reshaping family relationships in real time. The stakes are personal, public, and permanent. How will William protect his legacy? How will Harry navigate the backlash? And most importantly, what does this mean for the monarchy itself? The questions are countless, and the answers are only beginning to emerge. But one thing is certain. The stage is set for a confrontation that will leave no one unaffected. Now, here's the thing. The public thinks they know what's coming. They imagine a restrained, diplomatic response from William, perhaps a measured statement, or a carefully worded media rebuttal. They do not anticipate the level of emotion, strategy, and intensity that actually unfolds behind palace doors. This is why the next moments are crucial, not just for the brothers themselves, but for everyone watching worldwide. Because in the world of the royals, every word, every gesture, every decision carries weight, sometimes unimaginable weight. And when William finally takes his stand, it is not just a reaction. It is a statement that will ripple across the monarchy, the media, and the public consciousness. But even as we prepare to dive into the main story, there is one final detail to set the stage. The emotions are raw. The palace is tense. Advisors whisper in corridors. Media outlets are primed for every possible leak. And William's decision, although calculated, is fueled by the kind of anger that comes from betrayal so deep it can't be ignored. He is ready to act, and the consequences, as we will see, are dramatic, shocking, and in some ways, unprecedented. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The tension is unbearable. You can almost hear the echoes of the palace halls. You can almost feel the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down on every word spoken, every action taken. And yet, the human story at the center of it all, two brothers, torn apart by ambition, emotion, and betrayal, is what keeps this tale gripping, unpredictable, and devastatingly real. You never really know a person until they push you to the edge, until the betrayals stack up, one after another, like bricks in a wall, pressing down on your chest until breathing becomes a struggle. For Prince William, that edge came faster than anyone could have predicted. The public sees the composed, dignified air, always measured, always calm. But behind the royal facade, the storm was building. And it wasn't just another minor disagreement. This was personal. This was a brother turning his words, his actions, his public influence into weapons aimed squarely at the family that had protected him, nurtured him, and loved him unconditionally. The first cracks were subtle. A carefully worded interview here, a hint dropped in a social media post there. The public barely noticed at first, dismissing Harry's words as playful criticism or youthful rebellion. But for William, it was like water dripping on stone. Tiny, repeated attacks that slowly, insidiously, carved out a space for anger and resentment. Every headline, every article, every analysis piece was a reminder that Harry was not just expressing an opinion, he was undermining the family at every turn. And William felt it, deeply, viscerally, in ways the public could never see. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the audacity behind them, the sense that Harry could say anything, anytime, and the world would listen. William's frustration grew as he watched his younger brother command attention, rewrite narratives, and expose private family struggles to a global audience. The palace staff whispered in corridors, wondering if William would finally react. Friends worried privately about his state of mind, sensing the tension building in ways that even media outlets couldn't fully capture. Imagine the scene. William, pacing the halls of Kensington Palace late one evening, his reflection flickering in the polished marble floors, phone in hand, after reading yet another scathing public statement from Harry. Every word cut like a knife. Advisors hover discreetly, knowing the heir is teetering on the edge, unsure whether to intervene or let him process the storm alone. In that moment, he felt a mixture of disbelief, betrayal, and a searing, uncontainable rage. And yet, the world still saw a calm, composed prince. A man who could smile for the cameras, shake hands, and appear serene while his private world was unraveling. But those who know the monarchy best understand that appearances are everything. Every gesture is scrutinized, every smile dissected, every pause analyzed. And for William, the weight of that scrutiny made the betrayal sting even more. Not only was his brother attacking him, but he was doing it in front of the entire world, manipulating public perception with precision. William's anger wasn't blind or impulsive. It was calculated, slow-burning, and methodical. He had spent years learning how to manage crises, how to protect the family, how to maintain dignity in the face of provocation. But this was different. This was not a media blunder or a minor scandal. This was a sustained, personal assault, delivered strategically, with the intention to provoke and expose. And the more Harry pushed, the more William realized he had to respond, not just for himself, but for the family legacy, for the monarchy, for the institution that had been entrusted to him. What triggered the breaking point, insiders say, was not a single event, but a culmination of actions. A particularly explosive interview revealed private family matters, painted William as cold or disconnected, and, most painfully, framed Harry as the misunderstood, wronged younger brother. Every word was a deliberate blow, and for William, every blow landed directly on his sense of honor, duty, and trust. The tension within the palace grew palpable. Staff members, used to discreetly managing royal affairs, were caught off guard. Advisors scrambled to assess the fallout, calculating public reactions, preparing statements, and trying to anticipate Harry's next move. Yet even they sensed that William was beyond the point of passive response. There was a fire in his eyes, a determination that could no longer be contained, a readiness to confront the situation head-on, consequences be damned. In private conversations, William expressed feelings he had never shared publicly. He spoke of heartbreak, disappointment, and frustration at the relentless barrage of public attacks. He questioned how a family could remain united when one member used every opportunity to publicly disparage the rest. And yet, even in his anger, there was strategy. He knew a hasty public confrontation could backfire. He knew that the optics mattered as much as the substance. And he knew that when he finally acted, it would have to be decisive, controlled, and undeniable. There's a particular moment insiders describe as the true breaking point. William had gathered in a private room with senior advisors. The walls, adorned with portraits of past monarchs, seemed to close in. He held in his hand a transcript of Harry's latest interview. The words were deliberate, cutting, and public. William's jaw tightened. He paced. He paused. He spoke, and when he did, his words were measured but searing. You cannot continue to attack the family that raised you. You cannot continue to manipulate the world's perception while ignoring the consequences for those who have sacrificed everything to protect you. And then he dropped a line that would reverberate through palace corridors for days. You are dead for us. The advisors froze. The phrase, so simple yet so devastating, was a declaration. It was not merely anger. It was a boundary, a severance, a line drawn in the sand. For William, this wasn't hyperbole. It was a statement of principle, a moment that crystallized years of betrayal and frustration. And the implications were staggering. What did it mean for the brothers' relationship? For the monarchy? For the public's perception, everyone sensed that this was more than just a private feud. It was a turning point, a moment that would redefine the entire narrative. But even as William set this boundary, the tension did not dissipate. It only grew, fueled by the inevitability that Harry would respond. The palace braced for what insiders described as a storm of unprecedented intensity. Every day brought new revelations, new comments, new headlines. And with every new statement from Harry, William's resolve hardened. This was no longer about diplomacy or optics. This was about protecting the family, the legacy, and the truth as he saw it. In the days that followed, William's strategy became clear. He would no longer remain silent. He would respond, not with equal public attacks, but with controlled, deliberate actions that conveyed the gravity of the situation. He would set the record straight, protect the monarchy, and ensure that the family's reputation, and his own, remained intact. Yet, the question lingered: how would Harry react? And what would be the cost of this confrontation, not just to them as brothers, but to the institution and the public who had watched this drama unfold for years? And so, the stage was set. The tension, the anger, the history, all of it coalesced into a single, explosive moment of reckoning. William had reached the breaking point. Every story has a beginning. Every feud has roots. And in the case of Prince William and Prince Harry, the seeds of tension, loyalty, love, and ultimately betrayal were sown long before the headlines, the interviews, or the explosive public statements. To truly understand why William reached a breaking point, we must go back, decades back, to the foundation of a relationship built on childhood, tragedy, and the relentless pressures of life in the most scrutinized family in the world. It starts with their mother, Princess Diana. For William and Harry, she was more than just a parent. She was a guiding force, a shield, and the emotional center of their lives. From an early age, both boys understood that they lived in a world unlike any other, where every smile, every gesture, every misstep could be immortalized in print, scrutinized by millions, and dissected endlessly. Diana did everything she could to give her sons a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos. She held impromptu tea parties in palace kitchens, took them to local parks, and tried to provide moments of genuine childhood joy. And yet, even in those early moments, differences emerged. William, as the elder, felt the weight of responsibility early. He was the future king, groomed from the start to understand duty, protocol, and the sacrifices required to uphold tradition. Harry, in contrast, was the younger, often more adventurous brother. He was charming, rebellious, and daring. Qualities that would serve him well later in life, but also create friction. The dynamics of being brothers in a royal family are complicated by more than age. They are shaped by expectations, public scrutiny, and the subtle but relentless comparisons that arise when one child is heir and the other is not. Childhood memories are full of contrasts. Friends of the boys recount playground moments where William would lead cautiously, calculating every move, while Harry would leap before looking, fearless and impulsive. At family gatherings, William often felt the pressure to model composure and etiquette, while Harry's playful mischief drew both laughter and occasional exasperation from adults. Even these small moments foreshadowed the divergent paths the brothers would take. The tragedy of Diana's death in 1997 changed everything. William was 15, Harry only 12. Suddenly, the world's eyes were not just on their family. They were on them individually, scrutinizing their grief, their public appearances, their emotional composure. William felt an enormous responsibility to hold the family together, to support his brother, and to navigate the media storm that followed Diana's death. Harry, younger and less experienced in public diplomacy, struggled with anger, confusion, and a desire to rebel against a world that felt unfair and unforgiving. Their bond, once light and playful, now carried the weight of shared trauma, responsibility, and unspoken expectations. As they grew into adolescence, the differences widened. William embraced duty and tradition, excelling in academics and extracurriculars, showing an aptitude for leadership and composure. Harry, meanwhile, sought outlets for his energy and his pain, sports, charitable work, and eventually military service. Their paths diverged, but the connection remained, a bond tempered by shared history, love, and loss. Yet even as they pursued their separate paths, the underlying currents of comparison, expectation, and public scrutiny never ceased. Every decision made by one brother would inevitably reflect on the other, adding tension to their relationship. School experiences added another layer to the complex tapestry of their bond. Boarding school, in particular, exposed both brothers to environments that were both formative and challenging. William excelled in academics, leadership, and social responsibility, while Harry often pushed boundaries, testing rules, and challenging authority. Friends and teachers recall moments where Harry's mischievous streak would get him into trouble, and William would feel the need to intervene or shield him. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not. These early experiences sowed seeds of both loyalty and frustration. William learned to protect his brother, to mediate conflicts, and to assume responsibility. Harry learned to navigate consequences, to charm his way out of trouble, and to value independence. Both lessons would shape their later interactions, for better or worse. Then came adulthood. Public life accelerated. William assumed greater responsibilities within the monarchy, attending state functions, leading charitable initiatives, and preparing to eventually take the throne. Harry, still finding his footing, pursued military service, charitable endeavors, and ultimately a life that balanced royal duty with personal freedom. The divergence in their public roles was stark. William was methodical, disciplined, and measured. Harry was bold, visible, and increasingly outspoken. What once may have seemed like harmless differences became a source of tension as the public, media, and even family members began comparing them relentlessly. Marriage brought new dynamics. William's relationship with Catherine Middleton, now Catherine, Princess of Wales, was marked by stability, mutual understanding, and public support. Harry's relationship with Meghan Markle was highly scrutinized, controversial to some, admired by others, but never free from media intrusion. Both brothers faced unprecedented challenges in love, family, and public expectation, but their approaches differed significantly. William maintained a careful, traditional approach. Harry embraced the modern, outspoken narrative, unafraid to challenge norms, even if it meant friction with the family. Throughout these years, the relationship between William and Harry remained deeply complex, at once close, protective, and unbreakable in some moments, yet strained, tense, and vulnerable to misunderstanding in others. There were moments of camaraderie, moments of shared laughter, and moments of profound support. But underlying all of this was a subtle, unspoken reality. The pressures of life in the royal family, combined with personal ambition, grief, and public scrutiny, created fault lines that could not always be bridged by love alone. Fast forward to recent years, and these fault lines became visible to the world. Harry's public statements, interviews, and media appearances were not just personal expressions. They were public reckonings that exposed tension, questioned loyalty, and challenged the very institution both brothers had been raised to protect. For William, who had spent a lifetime balancing duty, decorum, and private emotion, the repeated public attacks felt like a violation, not just of trust, but of the brotherly bond that had been nurtured since childhood. It's easy to underestimate the significance of sibling relationships, especially when one sibling is thrust into the global spotlight. But the reality is stark. The closer the bond, the deeper the potential wounds. William's anger is not born solely from public embarrassment. It is rooted in betrayal, in the dismantling of trust, and in the fear that the foundation of their family, the legacy of their mother, and the integrity of the monarchy itself are being undermined. And this isn't just theoretical. Advisors, insiders, and family members all recognize the gravity of the situation. This is a personal conflict with public consequences, and every move matters. What makes this history so compelling and so devastating is that the love between William and Harry is undeniable. Despite years of tension, public scrutiny, and personal differences, there remains a bond that cannot simply be erased. But love alone cannot resolve the conflicts of betrayal, ego, ambition, and public perception. The relationship is a paradox, strong enough to endure tragedy, yet fragile enough to fracture under the weight of relentless scrutiny and unspoken grievances. And so, as we look at the breaking point that brought William to utter the words, "You are dead for US," it is essential to understand the backdrop: decades of shared experience, tragedy, divergent paths, and relentless pressure. The anger, frustration, and decisive action we will explore in the following chapters are not born of impulse. They are the culmination of a lifetime of history. But here's the critical question. How does a bond so deep, forged in childhood, shaped by grief, and tested by life's most extraordinary circumstances, unravel in such a public, dramatic, and painful way? How does the love between brothers transform into a conflict that shakes not only their family, but the institution that has existed for centuries? And most importantly, what will it take to reach resolution, if resolution is even possible? The answers lie ahead, in moments of confrontation, strategy, revelation, and, ultimately, explosive decision-making. And just when you think you understand the history, the next chapter will reveal secrets, dynamics, and turning points that even the closest advisors barely glimpsed. Every feud has a spark, a moment when words cross lines and loyalties are tested. For Prince William and Prince Harry, that spark wasn't sudden. It was the culmination of years of tension, miscommunication, and differing worldviews. But the first public act of betrayal, the moment William felt a deep fracture in the bond with his brother, was unmistakable. It wasn't just a disagreement. It was a deliberate, calculated exposure of family vulnerabilities to the world, one that left William reeling and the palace staff scrambling. It began with Harry's first high-profile interview that went beyond harmless commentary or personal anecdotes. Friends recall the morning William first saw it, an excerpt in the press, carefully framed, highlighting supposed tensions, grievances, and criticisms of the family's decisions. William's initial reaction was disbelief. Surely, this was a misunderstanding, a misquote, a moment blown out of proportion. But as he read through the transcript, the reality sank in. Harry had crossed a line. The brother who had once been his closest ally, confidant, and partner in navigating the pressures of royal life had now positioned himself in opposition, publicly, against the very family that had nurtured him. The betrayal wasn't just about words. It was the context, the timing, and the way it was presented to the world. Harry had long been seen as the fun younger prince, adventurous and independent. William had been the responsible heir, carrying the weight of tradition and duty. But this interview reframed everything. Harry's statements suggested neglect, hypocrisy, and coldness on the part of William and other family members. He questioned decisions that were never meant to be public, revealing private conflicts and insinuating that the family had been less than supportive in moments of personal crisis. For William, the sting went deeper than public embarrassment. This was personal. A brother, someone he had shielded, advised, and protected throughout childhood and adolescence, was now weaponizing their shared history against him. Every anecdote, every recollection, every subtle jab was a reminder that loyalty is fragile, even when it feels unbreakable. William had always believed that blood, history, and shared experiences could withstand differences, disagreements, or even mistakes. But Harry's actions suggested otherwise. That in the court of public opinion, even family bonds could be sacrificed for narrative, attention, or vindication. The palace felt the tremors immediately. Staff who had been accustomed to handling minor controversies were suddenly thrust into a situation far more delicate. Advisors convened emergency meetings, debating how, or even if, they should respond. Every move carried consequences. Public silence could be misinterpreted as weakness or guilt. A statement could escalate the conflict. Meanwhile, William wrestled privately with anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. He had always seen himself as a mediator, someone who could manage crises with discretion. Now, discretion seemed almost impossible. The betrayal was too personal, too public, and too sharp. What made the moment even more painful was Harry's apparent strategy. This was not a casual slip or an emotional outburst. It was carefully orchestrated. The statements were timed, the quotes selected, and the framing designed to generate maximum media attention and public sympathy. Friends close to William described the surreal feeling of realizing that every word, every phrase, was calculated. The sibling he had loved and trusted had transformed into a public adversary, and the tools of that confrontation were words and perception rather than fists or confrontation. William's reaction was a mixture of private fury and strategic restraint. He knew that a rash public response could backfire, feeding Harry's narrative and playing into media sensationalism. But the longer the silence persisted, the more audacious the attacks became. Advisors advised caution, emphasizing protocol and measured statements. But the private conversations reveal a prince struggling with something far older and deeper than politics or media strategy, a sense of betrayal that cut through years of shared history, trust, and unspoken understanding. Insiders recall a specific conversation between William and a close aide in the aftermath of the first interview. The aide tried to reassure him, emphasizing that Harry was simply seeking independence and recognition, that public attention was a tool he often wielded impulsively. But William's response was telling. His voice was low, controlled, but tinged with raw emotion. "This isn't impulsive," he said. "This is calculated. He knows exactly what he's doing, and it's personal. He's turning the world against us, against me, against everything we've worked to protect." The betrayal extended beyond the personal into the institutional. William wasn't just angry at Harry as a brother. He was angry as a protector of the monarchy. Every revelation, every critical remark, every public insinuation had ramifications for the family, the palace, and the institution itself. William had spent decades balancing public perception, upholding tradition, and managing crises with a careful hand. Suddenly, Harry's actions threatened to undo all of that, exposing private conflicts in a way that could be interpreted as dysfunction, incompetence, or neglect. And yet, even in the midst of anger, there was a desire to understand. William reflected on their shared history, their mother, their upbringing, the tragedies they endured, the pressures they had navigated together. How had it come to this? When did a brotherly bond, forged through childhood and shared trauma, turn into a battlefield? And could it ever be repaired? The public, of course, saw only fragments of the story. Headlines screamed of rifts, disagreements, and controversies. Analysts debated motives and strategies. Social media buzzed with speculation, memes, and outrage. But the private story, the betrayal that William felt in his heart, remained largely unseen. And it is here, in the quiet, private spaces of the palace, that the true gravity of the situation is most apparent. The first betrayal set the tone for everything that would follow. It was the opening act in a sequence of public and private confrontations that escalated tensions, tested loyalties, and forced decisions that would have far-reaching consequences. William's anger, once simmering, began to crystallize into a decisive resolve. He would no longer tolerate attacks on his family, no longer allow personal grievances to be weaponized against the institution they both were born into. Yet, as insiders often remind us, betrayal is a powerful catalyst. It forces clarity, urgency, and action. And for William, the first act of betrayal by Harry was not just a moment of personal hurt. It was a moment of revelation. It revealed vulnerabilities, exposed fissures in trust, and set the stage for confrontation. It made it clear that the relationship between the brothers would never be the same, and that the next moves, whether public or private, would be decisive, deliberate, and potentially devastating. The palace began preparing quietly for what was coming. Advisors drafted responses, contingency plans, and strategic communications. Friends and allies offered counsel, weighing loyalty against pragmatism. And William, for his part, made a quiet but powerful decision. The betrayal would not go unanswered. He would act, not impulsively, but with precision, clarity, and an unshakable resolve. But as the world would soon see, this was only the beginning. Harry's attacks would continue, public scrutiny would intensify, and the stakes would rise higher than anyone imagined. The first betrayal had shattered the illusion of sibling harmony, and the next chapters would reveal just how deep the rift had become. And the most chilling question lingered in every palace corridor, whispered by staff, advisors, and family members alike. How far would Harry go? And how far would William go in response? The world watches. Every word, every glance, every public appearance is scrutinized, dissected, and amplified. And when Prince Harry crossed the line with his first public attacks, the media descended like a tidal wave. Headlines flashed across screens globally, social media exploded, and the public obsession reached a fever pitch. For William, the storm wasn't just about the media's reaction. It was about the way the narrative was being twisted, manipulated, and weaponized against him and the entire royal family. Imagine waking up to the sound of notifications pinging relentlessly on every device. The morning papers screamed accusations and insinuations. Websites posted excerpts of Harry's interviews with bold, inflammatory titles. Social media users, hungry for drama, dissected every phrase, speculated on hidden meanings, and crafted viral threads analyzing family dynamics. Every comment, every critique, every meme was another reminder of the breach of trust, another amplification of Harry's betrayal. The palace, normally accustomed to managing media attention, found itself on high alert. Advisors scrambled to respond to articles, prepare statements, and anticipate follow-up coverage. Communications teams worked around the clock, yet every effort to control the narrative seemed insufficient. Harry had mastered the art of media manipulation. His statements were carefully framed to evoke emotion, public sympathy, and controversy, all while keeping the focus on William, Catherine, and the family. For William, the experience was deeply personal. He understood the media better than most. He had grown up in its glare, trained to maintain composure and carefully curated appearances. Yet even he felt a sense of helplessness as Harry's words dominated the conversation, shaping public perception in ways that felt unfair and invasive. Each headline was a reminder that the feud was no longer private. It had become a spectacle, a public war with real consequences for family, reputation, and legacy. The intensity of the media storm was staggering. News outlets across the world covered every detail, often with sensationalized language designed to provoke outrage or empathy. Analysts debated motives, advisor strategies, and the implications for the monarchy. Late-night talk shows dissected the conflict, creating memes and viral segments. Even casual social media users became armchair commentators, assigning blame, predicting outcomes, and stoking the flames. It was a feedback loop. Harry's statements generated media attention fueled public discussion, and public discussion amplified the impact of each subsequent attack. And yet, within the palace, the storm carried an additional weight. William had always prioritized discretion, careful timing, and the protection of private family matters. Suddenly, those principles felt under siege. Every private conversation, every historical family detail, every nuanced disagreement had been lifted from the private sphere and placed under an unrelenting microscope. The emotional toll on William and Catherine was immense. Staff described tense evenings, late-night meetings, and whispered consultations about how best to navigate the fallout. The pressure was palpable. Even minor missteps could be twisted into scandal, and every action would be scrutinized by millions. Amid the chaos, William's emotions fluctuated between fury, disbelief, and profound sadness. He had known disagreements with Harry were inevitable. Differences in temperament, ambition, and perspective were natural. But this level of public exposure, this strategic manipulation of narrative, was unprecedented. For someone who had always carried the weight of responsibility calmly, the experience was jarring. The betrayal was not only personal. It was a direct challenge to the authority, dignity, and stability he had worked tirelessly to uphold. The irony of the situation was not lost on William. He had been raised to understand the importance of image, composure, and control. Every royal gesture, every public engagement, every ceremonial duty was carefully choreographed to maintain public trust and institutional respect. Yet, in an instant, Harry's media actions bypassed years of preparation, undermined credibility, and injected chaos into a carefully constructed world. The young prince who had once been his companion in mischief had become a master of disruption. Family members and close advisors struggled to balance loyalty with pragmatism. Some argued for a measured public response to counter Harry's narrative. Others suggested patience and discretion, emphasizing that Harry's attacks might fade with time. But the frequency, intensity, and precision of the attacks left little room for patience. William began to realize that the media storm was not just a temporary distraction. It was a tool being wielded intentionally to pressure, provoke, and reshape public opinion. The psychological toll was compounded by the public's fascination with every detail. Rumors, leaks, and speculation spread faster than the palace could respond. Every statement from William, every carefully staged photo, every public appearance was dissected, analyzed, and reinterpreted through the lens of Harry's attacks. Staff worked tirelessly to manage the optics, but the relentless coverage meant that even private moments, once sacred, were now fodder for commentary. Insiders describe evenings where William would sit in quiet reflection, phone in hand, reading the latest headlines with a mix of disbelief and resolve. He knew that reacting impulsively could escalate the situation, yet remaining passive allowed Harry to control the narrative. The weight of responsibility, both for his own reputation and for the broader institution, pressed down on him. Every move had consequences, and the stakes were unprecedented. And then came the social media amplification. Clips of interviews, sound bites, and memes circulated at lightning speed. Platforms became battlegrounds, with supporters and critics debating motives, actions, and loyalty. Public opinion began to sway, and even the most loyal royal supporters found themselves questioning, analyzing, and speculating. William realized that this was no longer a private family matter. It had become a global spectacle, where perception often mattered more than truth. Amid this chaos, William's focus narrowed. The media storm, while overwhelming, also provided clarity. It revealed who was truly aligned with the family, who was willing to protect its reputation, and who was using public platforms to create division. Advisors noted a shift in William's demeanor. Anger tempered with strategy, emotional intensity paired with deliberate planning. He understood that the storm could be used to his advantage if navigated correctly. But even as he considered strategy, there was the unavoidable human element: hurt. Betrayal is never purely professional. It is deeply personal. The world saw headlines and sound bites. William felt the sting of a brother turning the media into a weapon. He reflected on shared memories, family history, and the bond forged through childhood, grief, and shared responsibility. Each recollection intensified the pain, underscoring the depth of the rift that had been opened. Advisors warned of further escalation. Harry, they believed, would continue to leverage public platforms to maintain influence and sway opinion. The palace began drafting contingency plans, from media strategies to potential interventions. Yet even with careful preparation, uncertainty loomed. William could control his responses, but he could not control Harry, nor the way the world would interpret every action. In the midst of this whirlwind, William realized that the first step toward reclaiming control was understanding the storm itself, its sources, its amplifiers, and its consequences. The media was not just a channel, it was a battlefield, and Harry had chosen it as his weapon. William knew he had to act decisively, strategically, and publicly, but on his terms. Any misstep could escalate the feud, damage the family further, and embolden his brother. The media storm had exposed every vulnerability, magnified every perceived slight, and forced William to confront the reality that private betrayal can become a public spectacle overnight. But with awareness came resolve. He began to formulate a plan, one that would reclaim narrative control, protect the family's reputation, and confront Harry's relentless attacks head-on. And yet, as the palace braced for what was coming, one undeniable truth hung in the air. The storm was far from over. The headlines, the viral clips, the public scrutiny, they were only the beginning. Harry had set the stage, and William knew that the next move would determine not only the outcome of their personal feud, but the public's perception of the monarchy itself. The media storm raged, relentless and unforgiving. But what came next would cut through the noise, revealing intentions, strategies, and confrontations that nobody, not even the closest advisors, could have fully predicted. In the chaos of a family feud played out on the global stage, advisors and allies are often the unseen forces shaping every decision. For Prince William, this moment of betrayal and public attack by Prince Harry wasn't something he could face alone. Behind the polished public appearances, the interviews, and the headlines was a network of trusted aides, confidants, and advisors, people whose counsel would influence not just how he reacted, but the very trajectory of the feud. And yet, navigating their guidance was as complicated as managing the public storm itself. The palace, accustomed to decades of scrutiny, has long relied on a careful hierarchy of advisors. They are trained to manage crises, anticipate public perception, and shield the family from unnecessary fallout. But this was different. This wasn't a minor misstep or a small misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, public attack by a family member aimed at undermining the monarchy and tarnishing reputations. It required a delicate balance of diplomacy, strategy, and emotion. And William, for the first time in years, had to rely on this team not just for guidance, but for emotional support. Even the most loyal aides were unsettled. They had been through scandals before, affairs, leaks, minor controversies, but nothing prepared them for the scale and intensity of Harry's attacks. Some advisors argued for a measured response. Statements emphasizing unity, controlled interviews highlighting the family's perspective, and indirect counter-narratives to maintain public trust. Others, recognizing the personal nature of the betrayal, recommended a more decisive approach. Private confrontations, formal statements addressing the attacks directly, and even strategic interventions to prevent further exposure. William found himself in the difficult position of balancing two priorities simultaneously: protecting the monarchy and asserting personal boundaries. He needed to ensure the public saw a confident, composed heir, while privately managing the emotional turmoil of a brother attacking him openly and persistently. Friends close to him described tense late-night meetings where advisors would debate the optics, the strategy, and the timing of every potential response. Every choice carried consequences. Every word could either defuse the situation or escalate it further. The palace atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Senior advisors, who had once operated quietly behind the scenes, were now caught in a web of urgency, secrecy, and high stakes. Staff were whispering in corridors, aware that any misstep could become headline news. Consultants specializing in media, public relations, and crisis management were called in to weigh in on strategies, while family confidants attempted to mediate internally. And throughout it all, William remained at the center, trying to process the emotional impact while maintaining a leadership role. Friends and insiders reveal that William often spent hours in private consultations, reviewing every possible scenario. He would go over the wording of potential public statements, anticipate the media's reaction, and role-play possible questions or confrontations. Advisors encouraged calm and measured responses, emphasizing the importance of protecting the family's image. But William was no stranger to strategy. He understood that appearances mattered, but so did substance. Silence, in this situation, could be interpreted as weakness. Any reaction, however calculated, would be scrutinized by millions. There were moments when William's private anger clashed with the advice of his closest allies. Some suggested patience, believing Harry's attacks might lose momentum over time. Others warned that immediate action was necessary to prevent further erosion of public trust. William, seasoned in public duty but deeply human, struggled to reconcile these perspectives with his own sense of justice. The betrayal was personal, yet the stakes were institutional. Balancing heart and duty became a daily challenge. And then there were the unexpected voices. Friends outside the palace who offered candid perspectives. These confidants reminded William that he could not allow personal hurt to compromise public duty. They emphasized the importance of reclaiming narrative control, protecting the monarchy, and ensuring that Harry's attacks did not define the public perception of the family. Their words were blunt but necessary. The world was watching, and William's response would resonate far beyond the palace walls. In the midst of this advisory chaos, William began to identify patterns in Harry's approach. His statements were not impulsive. They were calculated, strategic, and designed to provoke. By studying the timing, content, and platforms of Harry's attacks, William and his closest advisors could anticipate potential next moves. It became clear that this feud was not merely personal. It was a public strategy, leveraging media attention, social scrutiny, and the fascination of the global audience. Understanding this allowed William to formulate a response that was measured yet powerful, strategic yet deeply personal. Despite the high stakes and relentless pressure, William also relied on emotional allies, family members and confidants who provided a sense of grounding. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was a source of immense support, offering perspective, calm, and insight into public perception. She reminded William of the importance of protecting not only his image but his emotional well-being. Their discussions, often late into the night, involved weighing the balance between private emotion and public duty, ensuring that every decision was both principled and strategically sound. The role of allies extended beyond emotional support. Advisors helped William craft messaging that could subtly counter Harry's narrative without escalating the feud. Every public appearance, every photograph, every speech was carefully considered. Body language, wardrobe, location, and timing were analyzed for maximum impact. The palace became a hub of strategic planning, with William at the center, orchestrating a response that was both protective and assertive. Yet even with these preparations, uncertainty loomed. Harry was unpredictable, capable of leveraging personal emotion, media strategy, and public fascination in ways that kept William and his advisors constantly on edge. Every interview, every statement, every leak had to be anticipated and addressed. It was a relentless cycle of planning, execution, and reassessment, a constant balancing act between maintaining dignity and asserting boundaries. And then came the advice that would shape the turning point. Act decisively, but strategically. Silence would no longer suffice. Patience had been exhausted. The betrayal demanded a response that was personal, principled, and public enough to reclaim control of the narrative without descending into petty retaliation. William began to see the path forward, guided by a combination of advisors, allies, and his own intuition. Protect the family, assert boundaries, and confront the attacks head-on. But even as plans solidified, one question haunted every discussion. How would Harry react? And more importantly, could the family survive the next escalation? Advisors recognized that while strategy was essential, the emotional stakes were equally high. Every decision carried the risk of intensifying the feud, deepening divisions, and creating further public spectacle. In private, William reflected on the paradox of allies and advisors. They were invaluable, providing clarity, guidance, and strategic insight. Yet, their involvement also underscored the magnitude of the conflict. No man could face this alone. The first betrayal had sparked a storm. The media amplified it, and now, advisors and allies were both shields and instruments, shaping every potential response. The stage was set for the next act, where strategy, emotion, and loyalty would collide in ways that would shock even the closest observers. And just when it seemed that the palace had anticipated every possible scenario, Harry made a move that none of them had expected. A calculated step that would test every advisor's prediction, every strategy William had developed, and every ounce of composure he could muster. The tension had been building for months, but nothing prepared William, or the palace, for the magnitude of Harry's next move. It wasn't a subtle remark or a whispered accusation. It wasn't a quiet interview with a minor media outlet. This was a full-scale, public attack, delivered with precision and intent, designed to leave an undeniable mark. It was a calculated strike, and everyone who knew the brothers could feel the reverberations instantly. It happened on a morning that began like any other, but within hours the world would be gripped by shock and disbelief. Harry had agreed to a live-streamed interview with one of the most-watched global platforms, a network known for eliciting emotional revelations and explosive statements. The cameras rolled, the questions were asked, and Harry's answers did more than shock the public. They ignited a firestorm that left advisors scrambling, staff whispering in corridors, and William facing the emotional intensity of betrayal all over again. Harry didn't hold back. He spoke with a deliberate tone, measured yet charged with emotion, laying bare grievances that had been simmering for years. He accused the family of being distant, controlling, and judgmental. He framed William as the embodiment of tradition and rigidity, implying that his elder brother's sense of duty often overshadowed compassion. Every phrase was crafted to provoke public reaction and create a stark contrast between the brothers. William, the composed heir; Harry, the misunderstood rebel seeking justice. What made the attack so devastating wasn't just the words, it was the timing and context. Harry had chosen a moment when global attention was already focused on the royal family. The interview coincided with a charitable initiative, a public appearance by William, and a high-profile announcement about royal engagements. In other words, Harry ensured maximum visibility, strategically positioning his criticisms when they would resonate most. The palace staff quickly realized that this wasn't impulsive, it was meticulous, designed to control the narrative and dominate headlines. William's reaction, though private, was immediate and visceral. Advisors recall him reading transcripts in stunned silence, jaw tight, eyes narrowing as each accusation landed. The words were not just provocative, they were personal, touching on aspects of family life, upbringing, and shared history that had never been meant for public consumption. The younger brother who once looked up to him, trusted him, and shared childhood mischief had now become a public adversary, and the world was watching every moment. The public reaction was instantaneous. Social media exploded with commentary, speculation, and outrage. Hashtags trended within minutes. News outlets dissected every line, often adding their own sensational interpretations. Late-night talk shows highlighted Harry's words, framing them as both a human interest story and a royal scandal. Friends and allies watched in disbelief as the media amplified the attack, turning what had been private grievances into a global spectacle. Inside the palace, the environment was tense. Senior advisors convened emergency meetings, assessing potential fallout and drafting contingency plans. Every possible reaction was debated. Should William respond immediately, issuing a measured statement? Should he wait, allowing the public to consider Harry's words critically? Should private mediation be attempted? The challenge was immense. Any misstep could escalate the feud further, deepen public divisions, or undermine the monarchy itself. William's emotional state was a mix of shock, hurt, and anger. Friends close to him describe hours of reflection, pacing through palace corridors, and reviewing past interactions with Harry to understand how it had come to this. Every memory of shared childhood experiences, of laughter and mischief, contrasted painfully with the public image of betrayal that Harry had now projected. It wasn't just public perception that was at stake. It was personal trust, family loyalty, and the integrity of relationships that had been cultivated over decades. Analysts later noted that the strategic brilliance of Harry's attack lay in its narrative construction. By framing himself as the wronged, misunderstood younger brother, he invoked public sympathy while casting William as cold, rigid, and unsympathetic. Every anecdote, every carefully selected word, reinforced this narrative. For William, this was the culmination of months of tension and frustration, a betrayal made tangible in the most public of ways. But the attack also revealed Harry's understanding of media dynamics. He knew that public sentiment could be swayed not just by facts, but by perception. He leveraged every tool at his disposal: the emotional weight of interviews, the visual storytelling of media coverage, and the viral power of social media. Within hours, the global conversation had shifted. The focus was no longer solely on royal duties or engagements. It was on the fractured relationship between brothers, the morality of public criticism, and the implications for the monarchy itself. William, meanwhile, began formulating his response. He understood that reacting impulsively could be disastrous. Any public counterattack might validate Harry's narrative or feed the media frenzy. Yet doing nothing risked allowing the younger brother to dominate the conversation unchecked. The balance between personal emotion and public responsibility became paramount. Advisors recommended a carefully measured response, but the undercurrent was clear. William had to assert himself, reclaim control of the narrative, and protect both his family and his own integrity. The emotional impact of the attack cannot be overstated. It was not simply a professional or public challenge. It was deeply personal. William, who had spent decades navigating public scrutiny and personal responsibility, was confronted with the realization that his brother, the person closest to him by blood, had chosen to weaponize their shared history against him. The betrayal cut deeper than any headline, any meme, or any public speculation could capture. Friends recount moments of quiet reflection for William following the attack. He would review past interactions, letters, and private conversations, searching for clues, signs, or regrets. He wrestled with questions. How did a bond forged through shared tragedy and triumph become a battlefield? How could a brother turn the tools of media, public perception, and strategic timing into instruments of personal attack? And most importantly, how could he respond in a way that was both principled and effective? The palace staff, meanwhile, prepared for the next inevitable step. They understood that Harry's attack would not end with a single interview. There would be follow-ups, leaks, and additional commentary. They began drafting contingency plans, media statements, and strategic communications, ensuring that William's next move would be deliberate, controlled, and impactful. Yet, even with these preparations, the unpredictability of Harry's actions loomed large. Every statement had the potential to escalate tensions further, forcing the family into increasingly high-stakes decisions. And then, amidst the whirlwind of media coverage, advisors, and public scrutiny, William made a critical decision. He would no longer remain passive. He would respond, not in anger, but with authority. He would assert boundaries, reclaim the narrative, and make it clear that personal attacks, regardless of intent or strategy, would not go unanswered. The move was calculated, strategic, and deeply personal, a culmination of years of preparation, loyalty, and principle. But even as plans solidified, one question haunted every conversation, every strategy session, and every reflection. How far would Harry go? And how far would William be willing to push in response? The public had only glimpsed the surface of the feud, unaware of the depth, complexity, and emotional intensity simmering behind palace walls. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test loyalty, trust, and family bonds. Harry had made his move. William had recognized the threat and prepared to respond. And the next steps, as insiders warned, would escalate the conflict in ways that would shock not just the media, but the world itself. The public attack was more than an interview. It was a declaration. And the brothers, now locked in a battle,